I think Thomas Tuchel has learned a lot from his experience at PSG. I think some of the press conferences that he did during the time that he's been at Chelsea reflect subtly on his time at PSG and perhaps the challenges that he had there, because he was at conflict with a lot of the people at PSG, and whether that's because they're difficult or whether it's because he didn't get what he wanted, right? And there will be an element of that with football managers. They are very good when they get precisely what they want, and then we'll see how they react when perhaps someone says no to them every now and again. But at this moment in time, his position is he has done something that most football managers would say is a very difficult thing to do, which is come straight in, and it will dispel the myth that you need time, and hang on a second, these are not my players, and I haven't worked with them during pre-season, and my aunt's my uncle. He's come straight in through the door and gone, right, good players, this is the way I want you to work, and I'm very definite in my views, and this is how you'll work. And ultimately, what that's given him as an opportunity is to do his job well. Now, the next stage for Chelsea is how does that translate into the next opportunity, which would necessarily, logically be an assault upon the Premier League. Winning 13 games in a cup competition, and maybe 5 or 6 of them under one manager's tutelage, is not the same as winning 38 games in a Premier League. So we will now see where this progress takes them. He's caught a wind, and he's ridden that wave, and he's done very, very well, and he's focused the mind of the players. And, you know, there's a lot of peripheral stuff that, you know, you see in the background, people like Tammy Abraham that are being completely marginalised, and that hasn't been able to affect the dressing right now, because Danny will tell you, because they're winning. Right? If that changes, then you'll see background noises coming into the back, and dissent, and people's philosophies that
they
don't...
It happened with Frank, didn't it, when, for example, they were on the bad run. And
Rudiger, people like that. Yeah.
You know, it always happens. But while you're winning, you can do what you want as a manager. I think it's positive times for Chelsea. I think it's... you know, it looks harmonious. Most of the players look happy. You'll always have a few players, even at a great club, who are looking for an exit because they can tell they're not part of it. And when you've got a wonderful squad like Chelsea, there's always going to be a turnaround of a few players, and he'll bring 1 or 2 in of his own. I expect them to have a good go at the title next season.
Why wouldn't it change the playing style?
I think it'll evolve. Depending on who the opposition is, but I don't think he's a one-trick pony where he's just going to play that way. I mean, it's a bit like when you look back at how Jurgen Klopp evolved as well. Front foot, high energy, high intensity, high press. You know, this in-your-face type of football. And if you remember in the early stages, they faded near the end of the season, and late in games they started struggling to hang on to wins and stuff.
The opposite now.
Well, they adapted, didn't they? Yeah. They adapted, and I think he's an intelligent man. He's not going to be. You're not going to watch Chelsea next season and see them play the same way they did against City every week. That's naive. I think they'll evolve to what they need to do, but this is a fascinating window for a lot of clubs, especially near the top. When you think of Arsenal and Tottenham's demise, when you think of, you know, what Liverpool might do next, so they need to add to get back up to. I know they've got some injuries, but, you know, to compete with City. But Chelsea are going to be a force next season. But the other thing as well, winning creates that confidence and that strut and that fearlessness, because you've won one already. They're kind of going in with a free hit next season to a degree.
Do you think that they will invest in the playing squad and bolster it in a significant way? I mean, he said we don't need 6 or 7 new players, maybe 2 or 3 new faces.
Depends who he lets go.
They're probably going to buy a striker, aren't they?
Well, you would think that's a logical solution, because the narrative will be what Timo Werner isn't doing rather than what he is doing. He's doing quite a lot besides putting the ball in the back of the net. But he drove those Man City centre-backs mad on Saturday night. A lot of narrative about
It's quite surprising, really, bearing in mind that they were frightened of him, although whenever he got an opportunity, he wasn't very frightening.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent he may not have been, because he wasn't clinical, but he took them into places they didn't want to go, and he showed certain people up. You know, we're talking about Ruben Diaz being the player of the year for the Football Writers, and we're talking about John Stones being waxed lyrical as a second coming, i.e. his second coming. Yeah. And they showed him up a little bit, and that should worry certain people for the European Championships, because, you know, they were found out a little bit in thinking and in ability. But you look at Chelsea and you say, I as a Londoner with no allegiance to Chelsea, I was very proud of them as a team, because I thought that their commitment, application and determination to overcome whatever, because the whole backdrop from Rio Ferdinand's claptrap on BT all the way through to every press article was Man City were going to roll Chelsea over. It was a done deal. Right?
I think they quite like that, actually, because they used it as a sort of tool, really.
Well, you would, wouldn't you? Because you sit there and go, well, hold on a second, we've done a number on you twice. We are a real team of real players with a real manager. This isn't a done deal in anybody's language.
There's a lot of chat in the build-up to the game in the club itself about, you know, everyone thinks we're the underdogs here. We need to use that spirit.
Yeah, I mean, that will take you so far, because if the opposition are so good, that ultimately you can have the best will in the world.
But they were never big underdogs. I mean, they're underdogs, I suppose, in the sense that...
Even I sat there thinking, look, Man City are the finished article and Chelsea are work in progress. So when it comes to this moment in time, most of the time, the finished article will overcome the work in progress.
Yeah.
In this instance, what you had was an irresistible combination of application, determination, and absolute alchemy
and
to
quality.
be able to, and quality. And it wasn't just a workmanlike performance. There was quality on the ball from Chelsea as well.
Here's a question for you. Thomas Tuchel's come in from the cold in January and February and taken Chelsea to this glorious position of winning the Champions League. Some clubs, and Chelsea, I think, were supposed to be that when they appointed Frank. Manchester United with Ole, Arsenal with Arteta, are building projects, investing in managers for the longer term. Does Tuchel's immediate impact almost blow that out of the water in some senses?
No,
the idea of a project manager.
No, because I think you have to look at what you're walking into. If you could argue Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, Thomas Tuchel could walk into any Premier League club and make them better with their coaching ability to a degree.
Yeah,
fair enough. But walking into a squad of Chelsea's quality,
because that's been built.
It's not a team that needed that much tweaking. Finding the right formation, motivating, that's part of good communication. That's part of any great manager. But you walked into a squad there of unbelievable talent. There wasn't that much in terms of you weren't looking at a group of players who hadn't been there and done it. They're all there for a reason.
Frank did say after his last league game against Leicester when they lost by 2-0, and they got run ragged by Leicester, by the way, that night. He said that this group isn't good enough to win the biggest prizes.
Well, he was wrong.
He was wrong, wasn't he?
But that's the difference I'm talking about as a manager who can mix a system with personnel to make it great, because the personnel was there. I never once.
But Man City were made for Chelsea as well. If you look at the FA Cup, if you look at the FA Cup final, Leicester were the antithesis of Manchester City.
Yeah.
They sat in, and Chelsea had to do something different. Whereas Man City play exactly the way Chelsea's set up suits.
And that's what I suppose Thomas Tuchel has to do next, is find a way to sort that out. Because against Arsenal, every time they play Arsenal, seemingly the same thing happens. Because Arsenal don't really do anything.
But that's where you've got to give him the his intelligence will come through. Football intelligence will come through in that respect. He's not going to set up that way all the time. It's just not going to happen. Also, the game dictates how it goes sometimes. City will always come at you and try and win the game. Always. Whereas when Chelsea play, we talked about it, didn't we? If Chelsea are going to play their first Premier League game at home to Newcastle next season, they're not going to drop off and they're not going to have the two centre midfielders 10 yards away from the three centre half.
Jim White and Simon Jordan, Monday to Thursday morning, 10 till 1. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.